One week before my son's wedding, he slid a $25,000 cashier's check across a crowded coffee shop table and said, "Take the money, just don't come to my wedding." I smiled, slipped the envelope into my jacket, and quietly walked away. A few hours after the wedding ended, my phone rang. His new wife was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. What she said next left me completely stunned. If you found your way here today, I'm already thankful. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining from? Let's see how far this story travels. Fair warning, certain elements here are fictional, crafted to illustrate something worth understanding. Names and settings are coincidental, but the message underneath all of it, that part is meant for you. There are mornings in a man's life when he wakes up and already knows before his feet even touch the floor that something has changed forever. That Monday in early November was one of those mornings for me. I sat on the front porch of my house on Blue Island Avenue with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, staring at a beige envelope on the little wooden table between my chair and the empty one beside it. The chair where my wife Margaret used to sit on Sunday mornings reading the paper, telling me I made my coffee too strong. I still make it too strong. Old habits are the last things to go. My name is Richard Walker. I am 68 years old. For 40 years, I ran a small auto repair shop, 2 blocks from this house, Walker & Sons, though it was only ever me and eventually Daniel. My hands are rough from 4 decades of work, my back aches when the Chicago weather turns cold, and I drive a truck that is 11 years old and runs just fine, thank you very much. I am not a man of great means. I never pretended to be. But I raised my son in this house on this street with everything I had, and I believed for a long time that was enough. That envelope on the table told me otherwise. I had been sitting there for almost an hour just looking at it. I already knew what was inside. I had opened it 3 days earlier, read every word, then folded it back exactly as it came and put it in my shirt pocket like it was a grocery receipt. I carried it around for 3 days before I finally set it on this table and made myself sit across from it. Inside that envelope was a cashier's check for $25,000, made out to Richard Walker, signed by Daniel Walker, my son. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, made a face because it was cold, and set it back down. $25,000, I said out loud to nobody in particular. Maybe to Margaret. Maybe to the pigeons on the telephone wire across the street. That's what he thought I was worth. $25,000 to stay home and not embarrass him. The pigeons did not have an opinion on the matter. I reached into the envelope and pulled the check out one more time. I looked at Daniel's signature, that clean, practiced signature he had developed sometime in law school. Nothing like the loopy scrawl he used to put on birthday cards when he was 10 years old. I looked at the amount written out in full in the memo line. The words were very neat, very deliberate. My chest felt like someone had parked a car on it. Now I want to be honest with you about something. When I tell you this story, I don't want you thinking I'm some kind of saint. I am not. I have made my share of mistakes as a father. I missed baseball games because of the shop. I was not always the most patient man when Daniel was a teenager. There were years when I worked so much that I barely saw him for weeks at a time. I know that. I carry that. But I also worked double shifts so he could have new shoes when his wore out. I drove him to every SAT prep class 40 minutes each way twice a week for 4 months. I took out a second mortgage on this house to cover the gap between his law school scholarship and what the scholarship did not cover, and I never told him that, not once. A father does not hand his son a receipt for love. That is what I believed anyway. That is what I was raised to believe. That is what Margaret and I agreed on from the very beginning. Tell me again, I said to the empty chair beside me. Tell me how we got here. The chair did not answer. It never does. But I know what Margaret would have said. She would have tucked her feet up under her, wrapped both hands around her mug, and said, "Start from the beginning, Richard. You always skip the beginning." She was right. I always skip the beginning. So here it is, the beginning. I was 24 years old the first time I held Daniel in my arms. He was 7 pounds 4 ounces, and he screamed like he was furious at the world for existing. The nurse put him in my arms, and I stood there in that delivery room at Rush University Medical Center, this big, rough-handed mechanic from the South Side, and I cried like a child. Margaret watched me from the bed and laughed even though she had just been through 12 hours of labor, and laughing probably hurt. "Look at you," she said. "Big, tough Richard Walker, crying over a 7-pound baby." "He's mine," I said. Like that explained everything. Like that was all the reason in the world. "He is," she said, smiling. "Don't drop him." I did not drop him. I did not drop him then, and I did not drop him for the 32 years that followed through every skinned knee and failed test and broken heart and triumph and setback that a boy becomes a man through. I held on. That was the one thing I always knew how to do. So when my son slid a $25,000 check across a coffee shop table and told me to stay away from his wedding because a retired mechanic from Blue Island Avenue did not fit with the crowd, he was building his life around something cracked open inside me that I am not sure has fully closed since. I folded the check and put it back in the envelope. I looked out at the street, a woman walking her dog, a kid on a bicycle, 2 old men from down the block nodding at each other on the corner. The South Side on an ordinary Monday morning. The South Side I have known my whole life. The worst part, I said to the empty chair, wasn't the money. The worst part was the look on his face when he handed it to me, like he had already decided what I was worth before he ever sat down. I stood up, took my cold coffee inside, and poured it down the sink. If you want to understand how we got to that coffee shop table, how a man's son can look him in the eyes and hand him a check like a severance package, then I need to take you back. Back to the boy I raised. Back to the man he became. Back to the Friday afternoon in September when I walked into a parking garage and saw something I could not unsee. But first, you need to know who Daniel Walker was before the world got its hands on him. Margaret always said I fell in love with her because she laughed at my jokes, but that is not entirely true. I fell in love with her because she was the only woman I had ever met who looked at my grease-stained hands on a first date and did not flinch. It was 1983, a neighborhood cookout on Halsted Street, and I showed up straight from the shop because I did not have time to go home and change. Half the men there were in button-down shirts and pressed slacks. I was in work pants and a flannel with motor oil on the left sleeve. Margaret walked up to me with a paper plate of potato salad, handed it to me without being asked, and said, "You look like a man who hasn't eaten since this morning." She was right. I had not. "I'm Richard," I said. "I know," she said. "You fixed my neighbor's Buick last spring. She talked about you for a week. Said you were the most honest mechanic in the South Side." She tilted her head. "High praise." "Low bar," I said. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one from the belly, the kind that makes the people around you start smiling without knowing why. I was done for right there on that sidewalk with a paper plate in my hand and motor oil on my sleeve. We were married in 1987 in a church 6 blocks from this house. The reception was in the church basement. Margaret's mother made the cake herself. I wore a rented suit. We danced to a song neither of us remembered the name of afterward, and it did not matter at all. Daniel came in 1992, and everything I thought I knew about love turned out to be a rough draft. He was a colicky baby, which meant he screamed for the first 4 months of his life, with a dedication that I had to admire, even when it was 3 in the morning, and I had to be at the shop at 6. I walked circles around this living room with him pressed against my chest more nights than I can count. Margaret would get up to take him, and I would say, "Go back to sleep, I have him," because she was working the morning shift at the school where she was an aide, and one of us needed to be functional by sunrise. "You're going to spoil him," she said once from the bedroom doorway, watching me walk the floor with Daniel at 2 in the morning. A baby can't be spoiled, I said. That's what every father of a colicky baby tells himself, she said. But she was smiling when she said it. He grew out of the colic. He grew into a curious, sharp-eyed boy who wanted to know how everything worked, why the engine made that sound, why the sky turned that color, why people cried at funerals if the person they were crying for couldn't hear them anymore. That last question he asked me when he was 6, standing at my father-in-law's graveside in a little clip-on tie, completely dry-eyed and genuinely puzzled. Because it makes them feel less alone, I told him. He thought about that for a moment. Then he took my hand very deliberately and held it for the rest of the service. He never explained why. He did not have to. He was a good student from the start. Not flashy, not a kid who raised his hand before the teacher finished the sentence, but steady, thorough, the kind of student who read the assignment twice before he turned it in. His third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, stopped me at pickup one afternoon and said, "Mr. Walker, your son thinks before he speaks. Do you know how rare that is in a third grader?" I told her I did not know where he got it from. She laughed and said, "Probably from you." Margaret pushed hard for him to go to college. We both knew it was the path out of the kind of financial scramble that had been the background noise of our whole married life, not poverty, never that, but the constant low hum of watching what you spend and hoping nothing breaks down before the next paycheck. When Daniel was in middle school, Margaret started setting aside $20 a week in a jar on the kitchen counter, labeled in her handwriting, Daniel's future. Not college fund, not savings, just Daniel's future. When Daniel was 17, his AP English teacher called us in and said that with the right preparation and the right essay, Northwestern University was not out of reach. I remember looking at Margaret across that little table in the school conference room, and she was already nodding before the teacher finished the sentence. "We'll figure it out," Margaret said. She always said that. "We'll figure it out." And we always did, one way or another, sometimes barely. Daniel got into Northwestern on a partial scholarship. He called us from the school library, whispering voice shaking so hard I thought something was wrong. "Dad," he said. "Dad, I got in." I had to sit down. I was standing in the shop phone pressed to my ear, and my legs just went soft underneath me. I sat on the bumper of a customer's Ford, and I said, "Say that again, son." "Northwestern," he said. "I got the letter. I got in." I pressed the phone against my chest so he would not hear me. I pulled myself together in about 30 seconds, which is about all a man gets in a moment like that, before he has to go back to being functional. "I'm proud of you," I told him. "Your mother is going to lose her mind." He laughed. That real laugh he had, the one that came from the same place as Margaret's. "Don't tell her until I get home. I want to see her face, son." I said I could not keep this from your mother for 30 seconds if my life depended on it. He was still laughing when we hung up. I did not tell Margaret right away. I held it in for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, which remains the greatest act of self-control in my personal history. Then I walked to the office at the back of the shop, where she had stopped by to drop off my lunch, and I said, "Our boy got into Northwestern." She set the lunch bag down on the desk. She put both hands over her mouth. Her eyes went bright and wet, at the same time that thing she did when something hit her so hard that happy and heartbroken arrived at the same instant. Then she walked over to me and put her arms around my neck, the way she had not done since we were young, and she cried into my collar, and I held her and thought this is what all of it was for. Margaret passed in April of 2012. Pancreatic cancer. She was 53 years old. She fought for 8 months with the kind of quiet, stubborn dignity that made everyone around her feel like cowards, forever complaining about minor inconveniences. She did not rage against it. She just kept being Margaret, practical, warm, clear-eyed until the very last week. Daniel was a second-year law student at Northwestern when she died. He drove home the night we got the final word from the doctor. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time without saying anything. Then he looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Dad, what do we do now?" My throat was so tight I could barely get the words out. But I reached across the table and put my hand over his, and I said, "The same thing we always do. We figure it out." He nodded. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. And then he stood up, went to the refrigerator, and heated up the casserole the neighbors had brought over because we both needed to eat, even if neither of us wanted to. That was my son. That was the boy I raised. I want you to remember that boy. Because the man he became, the man in the expensive suit who sat across from me in a coffee shop with a $25,000 check and told me I was an embarrassment, that man did not arrive overnight. He arrived slowly, one small compromise at a time, over years, that I kept telling myself were just part of growing up. I was wrong about that. And the Friday afternoon in September when I walked into the parking garage at the Langham Hotel is the moment I finally stopped telling myself otherwise. After Margaret passed the house on Blue Island Avenue, got quieter in a way I had not prepared for. Not just the absence of her voice, but the absence of all the small sounds she made, the way she hummed when she was reading the particular sound of her coffee cup, meeting the kitchen counter every morning, at 6:15, the way she called my name from the other room when she needed something, and stretched the last syllable out just a half beat longer than necessary. Richard D. Like that. I did not realize how much I had oriented my whole life around those sounds until they stopped. Daniel came home the weekend after the funeral and stayed for 2 weeks. We did not talk much about Margaret directly. We are both Walker men, which means we process grief by fixing things and staying busy. We repainted the back porch together. We reorganized the garage. We went through some of her things slowly and made decisions about what to keep, without ever quite saying out loud what we were actually doing. On his last night before driving back to Evanston for law school, we sat at the kitchen table after dinner, and Daniel looked around the room the way a person does when they are trying to memorize something. "You going to be okay here alone?" he asked. "I've been okay in worse situations," I said. "That's not an answer, Dad. It's the only one I've got right now," I said. "But I'll take it." He drove back the next morning. I stood on the porch and watched his car until it turned the corner, and then I went inside and washed the breakfast dishes, and that was that. He graduated from Northwestern Law in the spring of 2014 with a grade point average that put him in the top 8% of his class. I sat in that auditorium on a folding chair in the 3rd row with a paper program in my hands, and when they called his name, I stood up before I even realized I was doing it. A woman next to me laughed and said, "First one in the family." I told her yes. She squeezed my arm and said, "That never gets old." She was right. It does not. He was hired by Harrington and Cole, a downtown firm that does corporate law mergers, acquisitions, the kind of legal work that exists several floors above anything I have ever needed a lawyer for. His first-year salary was more than I had made in my best 3 years at the shop combined. I know because he told me not to show off. At least I did not think it was to show off at the time, but because he was genuinely amazed by it. This kid from Blue Island Avenue, who used to share a bedroom with a stack of engine manuals. "Dad," he said on the phone the week after he started, "they have a coffee machine in the break room that costs more than your truck." "Is the coffee good?" I asked. "Honestly, no. It tastes like hot water with ambitions." I laughed so hard at that, I knocked my own coffee off the counter. That was 2014. That version of my son I loved without reservation. The change was not dramatic. That is the thing I want you to understand. It did not happen the way bridges collapse one catastrophic moment and then nothing. It happened the way rust happens, slow, invisible, until one day you look at something you trusted and find it has been hollowed out from the inside. By 2017, Daniel had moved into a penthouse apartment in Lincoln Park. I helped him carry boxes on moving day, which mostly meant I stood in the elevator holding a lamp while he directed the professional movers he had hired. The apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows, concrete countertops, and a bathroom bigger than my bedroom. I walked through it and said the only honest thing I could think of. "It's beautiful, son. It's a good investment," he said. "Property values in this neighborhood have gone up 11% in 3 years." I looked at him. He was 25 years old, standing in his expensive apartment talking about property values. I thought, when did this happen? Out loud I said, "Your mother would have loved the kitchen." Something crossed his face quick like a cloud passing. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." That was the last time he mentioned Margaret voluntarily for almost 2 years. My old friend Frank Kowalski. He worked alongside me at the shop for 30 years before his knees gave out, and has lived 4 houses down from me for longer than that. Frank started noticing things before I did. He is built for noticing things, Frank. Retired sharp and with very little patience for what he calls people who forget what they came from. One Sunday afternoon in 2019, I was sitting at Frank's kitchen table telling him about a dinner Daniel had taken me to downtown, some restaurant in River North, where the menu had no prices on it, which I have always considered a bad sign. "How was the food?" Frank asked. "Good," I said. "I think." I ordered something I couldn't pronounce, and it arrived in about 4 pieces on a plate the size of a hubcap. "How was Daniel?" I picked up my coffee. Put it down. He spent most of the dinner talking to his colleague about a conference they were attending. I was there maybe an hour before I realized he hadn't asked me a single question. Frank looked at me over the rim of his mug. "Rich," he said very carefully, the way a man does when he is about to say something his friend does not want to hear. "How long has it been since that boy really looked at you when you were talking?" I did not answer right away. My throat felt tight. "He's busy," I said finally. "He's building his career." "Sure," Frank said. "Sure he is." He did not say anything else. He did not have to. The year Daniel met Olivia Carter, I thought things might turn around. He called me on a Tuesday evening, and his voice had something in it I had not heard in a while. Warmth. Genuine warmth, not the polished social warmth he had developed for client dinners, but something real. "Dad," he said, "I met someone. I want you to know because I don't know. I just wanted to tell you." "Tell me about her," I said. "Her name is Olivia. She works for her family's foundation. They do community development work. She's smart, Dad. Like actually smart, not just impressive resume smart. She asked me 3 questions in the first 10 minutes of meeting her that I didn't have good answers to." I smiled at the phone. "I like her already. She wants to meet you," he said. "When you're ready." I told him I was ready whenever she was. The dinner was at a restaurant in River North, different from the one with no prices, thank God. Olivia Carter walked in and shook my hand, with both of hers, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mr. Walker Daniel has told me you ran your own shop for 40 years. I want to hear about that, not how nice to meet you." Not the careful, empty pleasantries I had grown accustomed to from Daniel's world. She wanted to hear about the shop. "Most people don't ask about that," I said. "Most people are boring," she said simply. I looked at Daniel across the table. His eyes were bright, watching her the way a man watches someone he cannot quite believe is real. And I felt something I had not expected, a sudden, piercing sadness underneath the happiness, because I could see exactly how good she was, which meant I could also see exactly how much it would matter if Daniel was not as good as her. Driving home that night, I talked to Margaret the way I do sometimes out loud to the passenger seat. "She's real Maggie," I said. "The girl is real. I hope our boy knows what he has." A month later, Daniel called to tell me he and Olivia were officially together. I said all the right things. I meant them. But there was a small, cold thread of worry pulling at something in my chest that I kept trying to ignore. I should not have ignored it. The thing about a bad feeling is that it does not announce itself. It does not knock on the door and introduce itself. It just settles in somewhere behind your sternum and sits there quiet and patient, waiting for you to catch up to what it already knows. I had been carrying that feeling since the night I drove home from dinner with Daniel and Olivia. I told myself it was nothing. Old man worrying. A father who had gotten too used to having something to worry about, and so his brain invented things when the supply ran low. I told myself that so many times that by September I almost believed it. Then came the Friday afternoon at the Langham. Daniel had called earlier that week, casual and easy the way he used to call before things got complicated between us. "Dad," he said, "the venue coordinator wants to do a walkthrough of the ballroom Friday afternoon. I thought you might want to come see the place before the wedding. Get a feel for it." My heart lifted a little at that. It had been a while since Daniel had invited me into any part of the wedding planning. "I'd like that," I said. "Great. 3 o'clock. Parking is in the B2 level. Just tell them you're with the Walker party." I showed up at 2:40, which is how I operate. If you're not 10 minutes early, you're late. My father drilled that into me, and I drilled it into Daniel, though at some point he seems to have unlearned it, along with several other things. The Langham Hotel sits on the north bank of the Chicago River on Wacker Drive. All glass and steel, the kind of building that makes you feel underdressed just by looking at it. I parked my truck in the B2 level and sat behind the wheel for a moment, looking at the rows of BMWs and Mercedes and Audis, my 11-year-old Ford sitting among them like a work boot at a black-tie dinner. "You belong here as much as any of them," I told myself, which is the kind of thing you say when you are not entirely sure it is true. I got out and started walking toward the elevator. The garage was cool and dim, lit by those flat LED panels that make everything look slightly medical. My footsteps echoed off the concrete. I was thinking about whether I needed to feed the meter. I had not seen a meter, so probably not when I heard a voice. Daniel's voice. It was coming from around the far corner of the garage near the section reserved for hotel guests. I recognized it immediately. I have known that voice since it was 2 years old, and asking for a glass of water at 11 at night. I raised my hand to wave and walked around the corner, and then I stopped. Daniel was standing beside his black Mercedes. He was not alone. The young woman with him was Sophia Carter. I had met her once briefly at the engagement party 6 months earlier. Olivia's younger sister, 26 years old, bright smile, the kind of girl who fills a room without trying. I remembered thinking at the party that she seemed like a good person, easy to like. What I was looking at now was not two people saying hello. Daniel had one hand against the side of the car, and the other cupped around her face, and she had her arms around his neck, and they were kissing in a way that left absolutely no room for any interpretation except the one that was already turning my stomach to ice water. My feet stopped moving. My brain stopped working for just a moment, and the only thing that kept going was my eyes, which could not seem to look away. Sophia said something against his lips that I could not hear. Daniel laughed low and private and pulled her closer. It lasted maybe 10 more seconds. To me, it felt like 10 minutes. I stepped back around the corner. My back found the concrete pillar, and I stood there, with both hands pressed flat against it, like I needed something solid to convince me I was still standing. My heart was slamming around in my chest, like it was trying to get out. My mouth tasted like metal. That was Olivia's sister, her sister. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking badly enough that I dropped it once, caught it, nearly dropped it again. It was an older iPhone, the kind Frank had spent a Sunday afternoon in the spring, teaching me how to use the camera on, because he said I needed to stop living in 2008. I opened the camera. I walked back around the corner just far enough to see them. I took 3 photographs, quiet before they saw me. Then I pulled back again. I stood behind that pillar for another 2 minutes, maybe 3. I could hear them talking. I could not make out the words, just the cadence of it, the comfortable intimacy of two people who had been doing this for a long time. My son's voice, easy and warm in a way it had not been with me in years. When I finally heard a car door close and an engine start, I walked back to my truck. I did not go upstairs. I did not see the ballroom. I sent Daniel a text that said something had come up at the house and I would have to reschedule. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. One emoji. For his father, who had just driven 40 minutes to see the place where his son was going to stand at the altar, with a woman Daniel was betraying in a parking garage 2 floors below it. I drove home on the I-90 and I did not turn the radio on and I did not call anyone. I just drove both hands on the wheel, watching the city give way to the neighborhood, the way it always does. The skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the rooftops of the south side. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table with my coat still on and pulled up those 3 photographs on my phone. They were clear enough. Clear enough for anyone who needed to know something to know it. I sat there for a long time. Then I looked up at Margaret's photograph on the kitchen shelf, the one from our 20th anniversary, where she is laughing at something off camera, and her whole face is lit up with it. I have looked at that photograph 10,000 times in the 12 years since she passed. I know every detail of it. "What do I do, Maggie?" I said out loud, and my voice cracked down the middle when I said it. The photograph did not answer. But I knew somewhere in the part of me that had been her husband for 25 years what she would have told me to do. She would have told me to go to Daniel first. Give the boy a chance to do the right thing himself before anyone else gets hurt. That was Margaret's way. Always give people the chance to be better than they've shown you so far. I had learned that from her. I had tried to pass it on to Daniel. I put the phone in my pocket and stood up. That night I called Daniel and told him I needed to see him, that I had something important we needed to talk about face to face. He agreed, and his voice was careful in the way a voice gets when it already suspects what's coming, but hopes it's wrong. Good, I thought. Let him hope. Let him use that hope to make the right choice. I believed in that moment that he still could. The drive from the south side up to Lincoln Park takes about 40 minutes on a good night longer, when the I-90 decides to remind you that this is Chicago, and nothing moves fast here unless it is trouble. I made it in 35 because the traffic was thin, and because I drove the way I always drive when my mind is somewhere else entirely steady. Mechanical hands at 10 and 2. Letting the body do what it knows while the brain works through what the body cannot fix. Daniel's building had a doorman. Of course it did. A young man in a charcoal jacket who asked my name called upstairs and said, "Go right up, Mr. Walker," with the practiced warmth of someone paid to be friendly. I rode the elevator to the 14th floor and stood in the hallway for a moment before I knocked, doing what Margaret used to call getting yourself together, which in our family meant breathing until your hands stopped shaking. My hands were not entirely steady when Daniel opened the door. He was in dark slacks and a gray polo shirt, a glass of something amber on the counter behind him. He looked at my face and something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, not quite, but a kind of careful calculation, like a man adjusting his footing before a conversation he has already rehearsed. "Dad," he said, "come in." I stepped inside. The apartment smelled like expensive candles and leather. I did not sit down. "I'm going to say this plainly," I told him. "I was in that parking garage today before you got upstairs. I saw you with Sophia Carter." Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward his glass and then stopped like he thought better of reaching for it while I was watching. "Dad," he started. "I am not finished," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which surprised me. "That woman you were with, that is Olivia's sister, your fiancé's sister. And what I saw today was not 2 people saying hello." Daniel turned away from me and walked to the window. The Chicago skyline spread out behind him, all lit up and indifferent, a million windows full of people living their lives, without knowing that mine was cracking open on the 14th floor of a Lincoln Park high-rise. "You don't understand how complicated this is," he said to the glass. Every nerve in my body fired at once. My chest went hot and then cold. "Then explain it to me," I said. "Because I am your father, and I have been trying to understand you for years now, and I would very much like to keep trying if you would give me something to work with." He turned back around. His face was controlled. That lawyer's face he had developed somewhere in law school, pleasant surface. Nothing underneath you hadn't put there deliberately. "It's not something I can just explain in one conversation," he said. "Then start," I said. "Olivia is a good woman, Daniel. She loves you. Whatever this is with Sophia, you have time to stop it. You have time to do the right thing before anyone else gets hurt. That is all I am asking you to do." For just a moment, one single moment, something moved across my son's face that looked like the boy I used to know. Something that looked like he understood what I was saying and felt the weight of it. Then it was gone. He picked up his glass, took a sip, set it back down. "I'll think about it," he said. Those 4 words hit me like a closed door in the face. Not a slammed door that would have meant emotion, meant something was still live in there. A closed door. Quiet and final. I stood there for another few seconds, looking at my son, this tall, polished, expensive version of the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on Sunday afternoons, watching football. And I felt something in my chest crack so quietly that only I could hear it. "Okay," I said. "You have my number." I walked out. I did not slam anything. I rode the elevator down, nodded to the doorman, and walked to my truck. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before I started the engine. Then I drove to Frank's. He was still up. Frank keeps old man hours, which means he goes to bed at 9:30 and wakes at 5, but if you knock on his door at 8:15 on a Friday, he will have coffee made inside of 3 minutes. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "Get in here. I'll get the cups." We sat at his kitchen table. The same table we have sat at for 30 years, solving the world's problems over bad coffee, and I told him everything. The parking garage, the photographs, the drive up to Lincoln Park. Daniel's face when I said Sophia's name. Frank listened without interrupting, which is something he is very good at when he can tell the situation calls for it. When I finished, he set his mug down and rubbed the back of his neck. "Rich," he said slowly, "what are you going to do if he doesn't fix it?" My eyes burned. I pressed the heel of my hand against them for a second hard, because I was not going to cry at Frank's kitchen table, not yet. "I'm going to give him 1 week," I said. 1 week to make the right call, and if he doesn't, then I'll figure out the next step. Frank nodded. He reached across the table and gripped my forearm once tight, the way men of our generation say the things they cannot find words for. "He was a good kid," Frank said. "Not cruelly, just honestly." "He still is," I said. "He has to be. He just needs to remember it." Frank did not argue with me. That was the kindest thing he could have done. A week went by. 7 days that I counted the way you count days when you are waiting for something you are not sure you want to arrive. I went to the shop each morning out of habit. I had officially retired 2 years earlier, but I still had a key and sometimes went in to help Tommy, the young mechanic I had sold the business to, when he was short-handed. I fixed things with my hands. I did not call Daniel. I waited. On the 7th morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was scrambling eggs. It was a text from Daniel. 4 words, coffee, Randolph Street, 10 o'clock. Not Dad. I've thought it over. Not I need to talk to you about what I've decided. Just a location and a time the way you text a contractor when you need a job done. My eggs went cold on the stove. I put on my jacket and drove downtown. Intelligentsia, coffee on Randolph Street, is the kind of place that takes its coffee very seriously, and its atmosphere even more so, all exposed brick and pendant lights, and people with laptops who look like they are solving important problems. I arrived at 9:45, ordered a black coffee from a young woman with a nose ring, who called me sir, in a tone that managed to be both respectful and faintly surprised, and sat at a table near the window. I watched the street outside. A city bus. A bicycle courier weaving through traffic. Two women walking fast, shoulders up against the September wind coming off the lake. Regular people living their regular Friday morning. I sat there with both hands around my mug and tried to feel like one of them. Daniel walked in at 10 on the dot. Navy suit, silk tie, the Rolex on his wrist catching the light as he pushed through the door. He moved through that coffee shop the way he moved through every room now, like he owned the lease on it. He sat down across from me without ordering anything, which told me this was not a conversation he planned to linger over. He put a beige envelope on the table between us. My eyes went to it, then back to his face. He was watching me with that careful, measured expression, not cold exactly, but calibrated. The face of a man who has decided something and is now in the process of delivering it. "Daniel," I said carefully, "what is that?" "It's for you," he said. "Open it. I did not reach for it." "Tell me what's in it first." He exhaled through his nose. "It's a cashier's check. $25,000. He folded his hands on the table, lawyer style, composed and deliberate. "I need you to understand something about the world I'm operating in now, Dad. Olivia's father sits on 3 corporate boards. Her uncle is a federal Judiciary Committee advisor. There will be sitting judges at this wedding, state senators, people who shape the direction of this city." He paused, and then he said the thing that cracked something in me that I do not think has ever fully healed. "You're a retired mechanic from Blue Island Avenue. I love you, but your presence at this wedding will raise questions I cannot afford to have raised. People will ask, people will talk, and I cannot have that." The coffee shop noise kept going around us, the espresso machine, someone laughing 2 tables over the door opening and closing with its little bell. The whole ordinary world carrying on. My throat tightened so hard I thought I might choke on whatever I was trying not to say. I looked at this man across from me, this man in his expensive suit with his controlled face and his calibrated words, and I tried to find my son in there. The boy who held my hand at his grandfather's graveside. The boy who called me from a school library, whispering voice shaking, because he had gotten into Northwestern and wanted me to be the first to know. I pushed the feeling down, pushed it all the way down where I keep the things I cannot deal with in public. "Is this because of what I saw?" I asked. My voice came out flat and even, which cost me more than anything I have ever paid for. In the parking garage, something flickered behind Daniel's eyes. "This is about the wedding," he said. "That's all." He pushed the envelope closer to me across the table. "Take a trip," he said. "Go to Florida. Go to Arizona. Go anywhere you want. Just—" He stopped, straightened his tie. "Don't come to the wedding." I looked at that envelope for a long time. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the jar on the kitchen counter labeled "Daniel's Future" in her handwriting. I thought about the second mortgage on my house that I had never told my son about. I thought about a 7-pound baby screaming in a delivery room. Then I picked up the envelope. I put it in my inside jacket pocket. I stood up. "Are we good?" Daniel asked. Same tone he would use to close a client meeting. I looked down at him. My son, 32 years old, sitting in a coffee shop in a suit that cost more than my truck payment, asking me if we were good after handing me a check to buy my absence from his wedding, and I felt something I had never felt for Daniel in my entire life. Pity, not anger, not hatred. Pity. Because somewhere underneath all that polish and calculation was a man who genuinely believed that money was the right tool for this particular job, and that was the saddest thing I had encountered in a very long time. "You have my number," I said. Same thing I had said at his apartment a week ago. I walked out. I did not look back. In my jacket pocket next to that envelope was my phone. And on my phone were 3 photographs from a parking garage on the Chicago River, still exactly where I had put them. I had not deleted a single one. The night after I walked out of Intelligentsia with that envelope in my jacket, I drove straight to Frank's. I did not call ahead. I just showed up the way you do when you have known someone for 35 years, and certain courtesies have long since become unnecessary. Frank opened the door before I could knock a second time. He took one look at my face and stepped aside. "Kitchen," he said. "I'll get the whiskey. Coffee isn't going to cut it tonight." We sat at his table and I put the envelope down between us. Frank stared at it. He did not touch it. "How much?" he said. 25,000. Frank let out a long breath through his nose that was not quite a word, but carried the full weight of one. Then he looked up at me. "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I haven't spent it. I'm not going to spend it." "Then give it back." "I can't give it back," I said. "If I give it back, it's like none of it happened. Like he didn't sit across from me and tell me I was an embarrassment with a price tag." Frank wrapped both hands around his glass. "Rich, those pictures you took, you still have them." "Still on the cloud backup," I said. "I checked this morning." Frank nodded slowly. "Then Daniel knows you can still use them." I looked at my glass. "He has to. So what do you think he does next?" Frank said. "Because a man like Daniel, a lawyer, somebody who thinks 3 moves ahead, he doesn't just hand you a check and hope for the best. He plans for what happens if the check doesn't work." That sat in my chest like a stone. I did not answer because I did not have an answer. I just picked up my glass and finished it and stared at the wall. Frank refilled both our glasses without being asked. "I'm scared, Frank," I said. And saying it out loud to another human being made it more real and somehow more bearable at the same time. Not of Daniel, of what he's become, of how far he's willing to go. Frank reached across and put his hand on mine for a second. "Just a second. You're not wrong to be scared," he said. "But you've still got those pictures. That's something." I nodded. I went home. I put the envelope in the nightstand drawer, and for the next 3 weeks I waited. What I did not know, what I only learned much later piece by piece from Marcus Webb and from Arthur Voss himself, was what Daniel was doing during those 3 weeks. I met Arthur Voss for the first time 6 weeks after the wedding, at a diner in Wicker Park. He had asked to meet through a mutual contact. He sat across from me in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and he could not look me in the eye. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I need you to know that I didn't understand what I was part of. Not all of it." "Tell me what you did understand," I said. He swallowed hard. "Daniel reached out through a friend of a friend. Said he needed an actor for a one-day role, playing a father at a family event." He shook his head. "He said you two were estranged, that you had refused to come to the wedding, but that an empty seat in the front row would cause problems with the bride's family. And that seemed reasonable to you," I said. My voice was steady, but my jaw was tight. Arthur winced. "I needed the money, Mr. Walker. I'm not proud of that answer, but it's the truth. I owed 4 months' rent. My agent hadn't called in 6 weeks. He finally looked at me. His eyes were red around the rims. He paid me $15,000. He coached me every evening for 2 weeks. "What did he teach you?" I asked. "Your birthday. March 14th, 1956. Your wife's name, Margaret. That she passed in the spring of 2012. He paused. "The name Frank Kowalski. That you worked as a mechanic for 40 years. He wrote it all out on index cards and had me recite it back to him like lines." Something cold moved through me. My own life reduced to flashcards. "He told me one more thing," Arthur said. He hesitated like a man bracing for impact. "He said you had a shrimp allergy." I stared at him. "I don't have a shrimp allergy." Arthur closed his eyes briefly. "I know that now. I found out at the reception when someone mentioned peanuts, and I had no idea why that would matter." He pressed his lips together. "Daniel has the peanut allergy, doesn't he?" "Since he was 4 years old," I said. "I'm the one who drove him to the emergency room the first time." Arthur set his coffee cup down. His hands were shaking slightly. "He forgot," he said quietly. "He was so busy building the plan that he forgot what kind of father you actually were." We sat with that for a moment. Then Arthur looked at me again, and his voice broke just slightly at the edges. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker. I am genuinely deeply sorry. If I had known about the other part about what they did to get you out of the way that morning, I would never have agreed to any of it. You have to believe that." I looked at this man across the table, this tired, guilty 60-year-old actor who had made a bad decision for an understandable reason, and I believed him. Not because I am particularly forgiving by nature, but because the regret on his face was the realest thing I had seen from anyone connected to that day. "I believe you," I said. He exhaled like I had just cut a rope he had been hanging from. "What happens to me now?" he asked. "Legally, I mean." "That's not my decision," I said. "But I'll tell you this much, the fact that you're sitting here telling me the truth that matters, to me and probably to other people too." He nodded. He picked up his coffee. His hands had stopped shaking. I drove home thinking about index cards, about my son sitting across from a stranger, coaching him on how to be me, and not once getting the allergy right. I was up at 5:30 on the morning of the wedding. I had not slept well, the kind of night where you drift in and out, and each time you surface, the thing you were hoping to escape from is right there waiting. By 5, I gave up entirely, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and sat there in the dark for a while with my hands on my knees. The suit was hanging on the closet door. I had picked it up from the dry cleaner 2 days before. Dark charcoal, the shoulders a little loose on me now. Margaret's funeral suit. The only suit I owned. I stood up and took it off the hanger, and I said out loud to her photograph on the dresser, "I know, don't say it." Her photograph smiled at me the way it always does. "It's also the only suit I own," I said. "So we're working with what we have, Maggie. Same as always." I swear I could hear her. "Richard Walker, you are the most stubborn man I have ever loved." "And you married me anyway," I told her. "So what does that say about you?" I put the suit on. Then I stood in front of the bathroom mirror with the blue striped tie in both hands, the one she gave me in 1998. And I went through the same argument with myself I go through every time I wear a tie, which is that I have never successfully knotted one without her standing behind me doing it herself. "You're going to have to walk me through this one," I told her. I had just gotten the knot, approximately right, when the knock came at the front door. Hard, urgent, the kind of knock that does not apologize for itself. I opened the door. 2 men in white EMS uniforms stood on my porch. The taller one had a short beard and the calm, practiced expression fit of someone trained to deliver bad news without causing panic. The shorter one held a clipboard. "Mr. Richard Walker," the taller one said. "That's me. Sir, my name is Officer Hendricks with Chicago EMS. He said it smoothly, the way someone says a thing they have rehearsed. "Your son Daniel was involved in a vehicle accident on I-290 westbound approximately 45 minutes ago. He's been transported to Rush University Medical Center. He's stable, but he's been asking for you by name." My tie was still in my hands. I do not remember dropping it. I only know it was on the floor when I reached for the door frame because my knees had gone soft. "How bad?" I said. "How bad is he hurt?" "He's conscious and talking," the shorter one said quickly. "But the attending physician wants family present. We can get you there significantly faster than driving yourself." "Yes," I said. "Yes, of course. Let me get my jacket." I grabbed my coat off the hook, my keys out of habit, then set the keys back because they said they would drive. I patted my jacket pockets. Wallet. And there in the inside pocket, the old Motorola Margaret's phone, the one with her voice still saved on it. I carried it on important days. Today felt like an important day. I followed them to the white van at the curb. Inside, I sat on the bench seat and leaned forward immediately. "Which entrance at Rush?" I said. "I know that hospital my wife passed there. I want to know which floor he's on." "Emergency admissions," the taller one said. Third floor trauma bay. Rush doesn't have a third floor trauma bay, I said. Trauma is on 2. I sat outside that department for 6 hours when my wife was brought in. A beat. Just a half second too long. They've reconfigured since then, he said. Things change. I looked at his face. He was still wearing the practiced calm, but something behind his eyes had shifted the way a card player's expression shifts when the hand isn't going the way he planned. I sat back. I looked out the window. The city was moving past outside familiar streets, familiar landmarks. Then the highway. I watched the signs. Interstate 55, southbound. Rush University Medical Center is on Harrison Street on the near west side. You do not take I-55 south to get there. You do not take I-55 south to get anywhere in the city if you are trying to get somewhere in the city. I kept my voice even. I had to. This isn't the way to Rush, I said. Construction on the direct route, the taller one said. We're taking the bypass. What bypass, I said. I drove this city for 40 years. There's no bypass on 55 that gets you to the near west side faster. He did not answer that one. He just looked straight ahead through the partition. My phone was gone, he had taken it. In the first 2 minutes casually, the way you take something from someone who isn't paying close enough attention. What he did not take was the Motorola. It was an old brick of a phone, no screen glow, no smart signal pinging off towers. Margaret had kept it in a kitchen drawer for 12 years, and it looked like something you'd find at a garage sale. I had slipped it into my inside breast pocket before leaving the house that morning out of habit, the way I always carry it on days that matter. The taller one patted my outer pockets and took the iPhone without going further. Old phones don't look like threats. That was the only lucky thing about the whole morning. I reached in very slowly the way you move when you do not want anyone to notice you moving. I closed my hand around it. I want to call my son, I said loudly enough that both of them could hear. I want to hear his voice. We'll have you there shortly, the taller one said. That's not what I asked, I said. I asked to call my son, right now. Sir, please stay calm. I am calm, I said. I have been calm this entire ride. I would like to call my son. If he is injured and conscious and asking for me, he can answer a phone call. The younger one glanced at the taller one in the rearview mirror. That glance told me everything I needed to know. The van turned off the highway onto a 2-lane road. Trees. No buildings. No city. Just the gray November sky and the road disappearing into the distance. I pressed the Motorola against my palm and thought one bar. Just one. The van stopped and the engine cut. Both doors opened and closed. Footsteps on gravel moving away. Then nothing. I sat on the bench seat for about 30 seconds, listening. When I was certain they were gone, I stood up, tried the rear doors locked from the outside with something that did not give when I pushed, then moved to the side panel window. It was fixed, the kind that does not open. Through the glass, I could see bare trees, a dirt road, and a structure about 20 yards ahead, a cabin wood siding gone gray with age, a rusted metal roof, one window on the near side covered in grime. They came back for me 2 minutes later. The broad one, the one who had done most of the talking, opened the rear doors and said, "Get out, please, Mr. Walker. You'll be comfortable in here. There's water." "Where are we?" I said. "Somewhere quiet," he said. "Not unkind. Just final. Does my son know you're doing this?" He did not answer that. He just stood back and waited for me to climb out. I did because I am 68 years old, and the alternative was to stay in the van until they physically removed me, which would have accomplished nothing. Inside the cabin, there was a wooden chair, a cot with a thin mattress, and 2 bottles of water on the floor. The window on the near side let in gray November light. The door closed behind me. I heard a padlock click. I stood in the middle of that room and took stock of what I had. Suit jacket, dress shirt, slacks. No belt. They had taken it along with the phone smoothly when they helped me settle in during the ride. Wallet still in my back pocket, which told me this was not about robbery. and in my inside jacket pocket pressed against my chest, Margaret's old Motorola and the beige envelope with $25,000 inside it. I sat down on the cot. I took the Motorola out and looked at it. The screen read, "No service." "Come on, Maggie," I said out loud. "I need one bar, just one." I stood up and walked to the window. No service. I tried the corner farthest from the door. No service. I tried holding the phone up near the ceiling the way Frank had told me he used to do with his old flip phone in rural Wisconsin. No service. Then I tried the spot directly beside the window frame, right where the glass met the rotting wood sill. And I got something. Not a bar. Half a bar. The kind of signal that flickers and dies and flickers again like a candle in a draft. "There you are," I said. I tried 911 first. The call attempted twice and dropped both times before connecting. The third time it connected for 4 seconds, long enough for me to say, "I need help, I'm being held," before the line went dead. I stared at the phone. 8% battery. I had to be careful now. I sat down on the floor beside the window, back against the wall, knees up, and I held the phone in both hands, and I thought about who I could reach. Frank's number was not saved on this phone. The Motorola was 12 years old, and the only contacts in it were numbers from a different life. The police non-emergency line required me to know an address I did not have. There was one number I knew by heart. I had dialed it so many times over the past 2 years that it had worn a groove in my memory. I had never used it for anything more complicated than confirming a Sunday dinner time. Olivia's number. I did not know if she would pick up a call from an unknown number on her wedding day. I did not know if her phone would even be on her person during the ceremony. I did not know if she would believe me or if Daniel had already told her some version of events that made me the unreasonable one. What I knew was that she was the only person who could do something about what was happening, and that she deserved to know the truth. I opened the album first. I needed a moment before I made the call, and looking at Margaret always gave me what I needed. The album was small, the kind with the magnetic pages that yellowed at the edges. I had tucked it into my inside pocket this morning because I wanted her close today, on a day that was supposed to be about family. I opened it on my lap and turned the pages slowly. Daniel, at 3 years old, in a plastic swimming pool in the backyard, squinting at the camera and grinning like he had invented summer. Daniel on his first day of school lunchbox, shaped like a fire truck, one sock higher than the other. Daniel at his high school graduation, taller than me by then, with Margaret's arm around his waist, and her face turned up toward him like he was something she could not quite believe she had made. And Margaret. Page after page of Margaret. At the kitchen table, in the garden, on the front porch of this very house, and the last one, the one I almost cannot look at but always do anyway, her in the hospital bed 4 days before she passed, smiling at the camera with every ounce of energy she had left. "I don't know how this ends, Maggie," I said to that photograph. My voice cracked right down the middle, and I let it. There was no one to hold it together for in that cabin. I don't know what's happening at that hotel right now. I don't know if Olivia knows anything is wrong. I don't know if anyone is looking for me. I pressed my thumb gently against the photograph. But I know what you'd tell me to do. You'd tell me to stop sitting on the floor feeling sorry for myself and make the call. I closed the album. I looked at the Motorola. 6%. I dialed Olivia's number. It rang 4 times, and I was already composing what I would say to voicemail when the line connected. "Hello." Her voice was careful, the way you answer an unknown number when you are in the middle of something important. "Olivia," I said. "It's Richard. Richard Walker." A sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Walker." The careful tone dissolved instantly, replaced by something that cracked at the edges, relief and alarm hitting at the same time. "Where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm all right," I said. "I'm not hurt, but I need you to listen to me carefully because I don't have much battery left. Okay. Her voice steadied itself the way a person's does when they decide that falling apart can wait. I'm listening. Tell me everything. I'm in a cabin somewhere outside Joliet. They took my phone and drove me here this morning. 2 men, white van, fake EMS uniforms. I don't know the address, but I can see a grain elevator from the window, maybe half a mile east. Route 30 runs somewhere nearby. I heard trucks. Oh, God. Her voice broke on those 2 words, not a sob, but the sound of something collapsing inward. Oh, God, Mr. Walker, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't know. Sweetheart, I said, and my own throat tightened, saying that word to her and this young woman who had done nothing wrong and was about to have her whole world turned over. This is not your fault, not one piece of it, but I need you to do something for me. Anything, she said immediately. Tell me. There's a man at that hotel today, sitting in the front row on the groom's side. He is not me. The phone beeped once, low battery warning. I spoke faster. His name is Arthur Voss. Daniel hired him. And on my phone, the phone they took there, are photographs of Daniel and your sister from 2 months ago. The line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Not empty quiet, the kind of quiet that means someone is absorbing something that is rearranging everything they thought they knew. How long have you known? She whispered. 2 months, I said. I tried to get Daniel to stop it himself. He didn't. Another beep, 4%. Find Marcus Webb, I said. Your family's security man. Tell him where I described. Tell him to bring someone who knows how to look at traffic cameras. The phone beeped again, urgent now. Olivia, I'm going to find you, she said, and her voice had gone from broken to iron in the space of 10 words. Don't hang up. Battery's almost. Mr. Walker, I will find you, I promise. The screen went black. I sat on the floor of that cabin with a dead phone in both hands, and the album open on my knee, and I looked at Margaret's photograph, and I said, she's going to be okay, Maggie. That girl is going to be okay. Then I leaned my head back against the wall, closed my eyes, and waited. We're right in the middle of this story now, and things are about to shift in a way nobody in that ballroom saw coming. Before I go any further, drop a 10 in the comments right now. Just the number. That's how I know you're still here with me, and honestly, it means everything. One thing I want to mention. Some elements of this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Not every detail reflects a single lived experience. If that's not something you'd like to continue with, this is a perfectly good place to step away. No hard feelings at all. What I am about to tell you I did not see with my own eyes. I was sitting on the floor of a cabin in Joliet, with a dead phone and an album of photographs, while all of it was happening 45 minutes away. But Olivia told me. She sat across from me weeks later at a diner in River North, ordered coffee she did not drink, and walked me through every detail the way a person does when they need to say a thing out loud before they can let it go. So I want you to see it the way she eventually helped me see it. Every piece of the day I missed. Arthur Voss arrived at the Langham at 9:15 in a car service Daniel had arranged. He told me later at our meeting in Wicker Park that he stood outside the hotel for a full 2 minutes before going in, telling himself it was just another performance. Just another role that he had played harder parts in 30 years of regional theater than a retired mechanic from the south side of Chicago. He was wrong about that, as it turned out. Inside, Daniel met him in a side corridor near the ballroom entrance, away from the arriving guests. You ready? Daniel said. As I'll ever be, Arthur told him. Daniel looked him over, straightened his lapel, adjusted his pocket square, the way a director gives a last note before the curtain. Remember, Daniel said, if anyone asks about the shop 40 years on Blue Island Avenue, if anyone asks about Margaret Spring of 2012, if anyone asks about... I know the material, Arthur said. He told me his voice came out more clipped than he intended, and Daniel gave him a look. Sorry. Opening night nerves. Daniel almost smiled at that. Almost. "You're not on stage," he said. "You're just a proud father at his son's wedding. Keep it simple." Arthur nodded. He walked into the ballroom. He took his seat in the front row on the left side, and the ceremony began. Olivia said she noticed him immediately, not because anything was wrong, but because she had looked forward to meeting Daniel's father properly, had heard fragments about him over 2 years of dating, and wanted to finally have a real conversation. She glanced at him from the altar during the processional and thought he looks like a kind man. She felt warm about it. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. Arthur performed well by all accounts, stood at the right moments, bowed his head during the prayer, even produced what looked like genuine emotion when the vows were exchanged, which Olivia later said she almost respected him for. Almost. The trouble started at the cocktail reception in the adjacent room, when Arthur found himself in a cluster of guests that included Judge Harold Bennett, a retired federal judge and old friend of Olivia's father, a man with the particular sharpness of someone who has spent 40 years professionally detecting when people are not telling the full truth. "So you ran the shop yourself the whole time?" Judge Bennett said, turning to Arthur with genuine curiosity. "How many years total?" 30 years, Arthur said. Confident, easy. Olivia was 3 feet away, refreshing her champagne. She heard it. Daniel had told her his father worked that shop for 40 years, not 30. She set her glass down and looked at Arthur more carefully. 20 minutes later, a woman at the reception, one of Olivia's college friends, asked Arthur about Margaret. "She must have been so proud of Daniel," the woman said warmly. "When did you lose her, if you don't mind my asking?" "Fall of 2012, Arthur said. "Beautiful autumn that year. She always loved the fall." Olivia felt something cold move through her stomach. She had asked Daniel once early in their relationship about his mother. He had told her she passed in April, springtime. The trees were just starting to come in, and she never got to see them that year, and I've thought about that every April since. Springtime, not fall. She did not say anything. She smiled. She moved through the room. She filed both details away in a part of her brain that was now running a very different calculation than the one it had been running this morning. The third moment was the one that decided everything. Dinner was served in the main ballroom, a formal seated affair. 7 courses, the kind of menu that takes 6 months to plan. One of the past appetizers was chicken sauté with peanut dipping sauce. Olivia watched Arthur take one from the tray, dip it generously, and eat it with evident enjoyment. She excused herself from the table. She walked to the restroom. She stood at the sink with both hands gripping the edge of the counter, and she looked at herself in the mirror, and she said out loud to her own reflection, "Daniel is allergic to peanuts. His father spent 20 years making sure no one served peanuts at any family event. And that man just ate peanut sauce and asked for another one." She gripped the counter harder. Her knuckles went white. "Who is that man?" she said to the mirror. Her reflection did not answer. But her memory did, every small inconsistency from the past 4 hours, suddenly snapping together like pieces of a lock turning over. 30 years, not 40. Fall, not spring. Peanut sauce. She straightened up. She smoothed her dress. She walked back out into the reception with a smile on her face that she would later describe to me as the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. "I knew that if I showed anything," she told me at that diner in River North, eyes fierce and dry, "Daniel would know I knew, and I wasn't ready for him to know yet. I needed time to figure out what I was actually dealing with." She moved through the rest of the reception like a woman walking across ice, every step deliberate, every expression managed, every conversation held just long enough. She danced with Daniel for the first dance and let him spin her, and smiled into his shoulder, and thought, "Who are you?" At 6 o'clock, the reception moved to an adjacent room for the after-dinner portion of the evening. Olivia told Daniel she was going upstairs to change her dress. He kissed her cheek. He said, "You were beautiful today." And he meant it. She said she could always tell when Daniel meant something. which somehow made it worse. She took the elevators to the 18th floor. She walked into their suite. The room was full of flowers, champagne on ice, the Chicago River glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. And on the nightstand, Daniel's phone screen lit up with a message. She did not mean to read it. She glanced at it the way you glance at anything bright in a dim room, reflexively, without decision. The name at the top of the notification stopped her cold. It was a name she recognized. A name that should not have been texting her husband on his wedding night. Her sister's name. She told me everything later, every detail, every word. I couldn't be there. But I know what happened in that room, as well as I know the lines on my own hands. Because Olivia Carter is not a woman who forgets anything. While I sat in that cabin outside Joliet with my wrists sore and the smell of old pine soaking through the walls, Olivia was in the bridal suite on the 14th floor of the Langham, still in her wedding gown, staring at Daniel's phone. It had started with a single notification. A name she hadn't expected. Sophia. I told myself it was nothing, she said to me weeks later, her voice trembling, as though she were reliving it minute by minute. I told myself sisters text each other. There's nothing wrong with that. But then I read the message. The message read, "Don't forget to delete the cabin photo after. Tyler said it's done." Olivia said her hands went cold. Not just cold, numb, the way your fingers feel when you've been out in January wind too long. She pressed her thumb against the screen and kept scrolling. I found the thread going back 14 months, she told me, and her voice cracked on those words. 14 months, Mr. Walker. While Daniel was planning our wedding, he was planning everything else too. There were photos, dozens of them. Daniel and Sophia at a restaurant in River North Arms, tangled mouths close. Daniel and Sophia at a hotel in Indianapolis. A timestamp March 8 months before the wedding date. Olivia told me she pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from making a sound that the guests downstairs would hear. I didn't cry, she said, and I believed her. I was too angry to cry. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped the phone, but I did not cry. She kept going. She found a PDF file labeled simply W Plan, and when she opened it, her stomach dropped to the floor. It was a contract, she said. An actual signed contract between Daniel and a man named Arthur Voss. $15,000. Role wedding representative. Date of performance our wedding day. She paused. Mr. Walker, he put it in a contract. Like hiring a caterer. She scrolled further and found the bank transfer confirmation. $15,000 wired to an account in Arthur Voss's name 3 weeks before the ceremony. She found a second thread, this one between Daniel and two men, Tyler Marsh and Kevin Doyle. The messages were clinical, almost businesslike. Package secured, en route to the property. ETA 90 minutes. Confirm no medical attention required. Confirmed. Package is ambulatory, minimal resistance. When I read that, Olivia told me, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I knew they were talking about you. I knew you were somewhere locked up because my fiancé decided you weren't worth having at his wedding. She said she stood up so fast her chair knocked against the vanity mirror. She grabbed her own phone from the dressing table and called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb had worked for the Carter family for 11 years. Former Chicago PD, 16 years on the force before he moved into private security. A stocky man with a graying beard and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. He picked up on the second ring. Marcus, Olivia said, I need you upstairs. Now, don't knock, just come. She told me Marcus arrived in under 3 minutes, still adjusting his earpiece, and she handed him Daniel's phone without a single word of preamble. She didn't need to explain, Marcus told me later. The first message I read told me everything. What do we do? Olivia asked him, her voice tight as a bowstring. What do I do right now, Marcus? First, he said, and his voice was steady in the way that only someone trained for crisis can manage. We make copies of everything on this phone before Daniel realizes it's missing. He pulled out his own device and began photographing each screen methodically, one by one. Second, do you know a man named Richard Walker? Olivia told me, her breath caught in her throat. He's Daniel's father, she said. He called you earlier, Marcus said. One missed call, no voicemail. The numbers registered to a Margaret Walker, deceased. He looked up at her. Ma'am, I think we need to find him. Olivia pressed her palm flat against the window glass, staring out at Michigan Avenue below, at the afternoon light, hitting the water tower across the street. She told me she was thinking about a conversation she'd had with me 3 weeks earlier, when Daniel had brought her to my house for dinner. She was thinking about how I'd made her coffee the way her own father made it, strong, black, no sugar, and how she'd thought then, this is a good man. He called me, she said, suddenly spinning back toward Marcus. Earlier today, during the reception. I didn't answer because the ceremony was starting and... Her voice broke finally, the way a dam breaks fast and total. Oh God. Oh God, Marcus. Where is he? That's what I'm going to find out, Marcus said. But I need you to do one thing first. Anything. I need you to go back downstairs, he said. Smile, dance. Let Daniel think everything is fine. Can you do that? Olivia Carter wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smoothed the front of her wedding gown, and lifted her chin. I've been doing what other people needed me to do my whole life, she said quietly. I can do it for 2 more hours. And she walked back out the door, but not before she took Daniel's phone and slipped it into Marcus's jacket pocket. I don't know exactly what time it was when the phone rang. There were no windows in the back room of that cabin. The only light came from a bare yellow bulb above the door, and it buzzed faintly, the way old bulbs do, like a dying insect. I'd been sitting on the concrete floor with my back against the wall, my jacket pulled tight around my shoulders, trying to keep my mind sharp, trying not to let the dark eat me alive. I had shut the Motorola off deliberately after the call dropped one long press screen, dark, preserved whatever was left in the battery. I had no idea if it was enough. I had no idea if Olivia had heard enough of what I said before the line cut. I just sat in the dark and waited, and tried not to count the minutes. Then I powered it back on. The screen lit up, 4%, still alive, and it was ringing. I grabbed it with both hands, fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped it twice. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, and for one terrible second I thought it was Daniel. But something, instinct maybe, or just pure desperate hope, made me answer. Hello? My voice came out hoarse, like I'd been screaming for hours. Mr. Walker? The voice on the other end was a woman's, and it shook like a bridge in a windstorm. Mr. Walker, it's Olivia. Olivia Carter. Please, please tell me you're alive. Everything inside my chest cracked open all at once. Olivia. I pressed the phone so hard against my ear it hurt. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm in a cabin somewhere off I-55 south of Joliet, I think. Maybe 40 minutes out. There's a road sign I saw through a gap in the door panel when they brought me in, something about Elwood Township. Elwood Township, she repeated, and I heard her relay it instantly. Her voice muffled as though she'd turned away from the phone. Marcus, Elwood Township, off I-55 south of Joliet. Go. Then she was back. Mr. Walker, are you hurt? Did they hurt you? My wrists are sore, I said, and my pride took a beating, but I'm standing. Olivia, listen to me. Daniel hired a man named Arthur Voss to impersonate me at your wedding. He's 62, gray-haired, probably wearing a dark blue suit. He doesn't know about the peanut allergy. He thinks the allergy is shrimp. Olivia made a sound like the air had been punched out of her. I know about Arthur, she said, and her voice went ragged at the edges. I found the contract on Daniel's phone. Mr. Walker, I found everything. The photos with Sophia, the messages to Tyler and Kevin, the PDF. I found all of it. My knees went weak. I leaned harder against the wall to keep myself upright. Olivia, I said, and I didn't try to hide the emotion in my voice. My eyes were burning hot and raw. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. I tried to stop him. I went to him, I confronted him, and he— Don't apologize, she said fiercely, and there were tears in her voice clear as daylight. Don't you dare apologize to me. You're the one locked in a cabin on your son's wedding day, and you're apologizing. That is not— Her voice broke. She steadied it by force of will, I could tell. That is not how this works, Mr. Walker. How are you holding up? I asked. She laughed, and it was the saddest laugh I'd heard since the night Margaret passed. I'm standing in a hotel bathroom in my wedding dress, she said, reading criminal conspiracy texts off my fiancé's phone while my head of security triangulates your location using cell tower data. So I've had better Saturdays. Despite everything, the cold floor, the aching wrists, the yellow buzz of the dying bulb above me, I felt something pull at the corners of my mouth. You're going to be all right, I said. You hear me? Whatever happens tonight, you are going to be all right. Marcus says the cell signal from this number is pinging a tower near Elwood, she said. He has the address of 2 properties registered near that road. He's sending someone. Mr. Walker, 30 minutes. Can you hold on for 30 minutes? I held on for 40 years raising a son by myself, I said. I can manage 30 minutes. She made a small sound, half laugh, half sob. There's a man outside the door, I said, dropping my voice. One man, I can hear him. He's been on his phone most of the time. Marcus knows, she said. He's handling it. And then the phone beeped. One long final tone. Olivia, I started. We're coming, she said. The screen went black. The cabin dropped back into silence, broken only by that droning bulb and the distant sound of a man's voice outside the door, laughing at something on his phone, not knowing the walls were already closing in on him. I pressed my back against the cold wall, closed my eyes, and thought about Margaret. I thought about her voice the way she used to say my name when she was worried about me, Richard. Just one word, like a hand on your shoulder. 30 minutes, I told her. That's all I need. Outside, a car started. Somewhere on the highway south of Joliet, help was already moving. Marcus Webb told me afterward that he made his first call at 3:47 in the afternoon, while the string quartet downstairs was playing something from Vivaldi, and 290 guests were raising champagne flutes to a wedding that was built on a lie. He didn't call the police. I asked him about that later. I asked him directly, sitting across from him at my kitchen table with coffee, going cold between us, and he didn't flinch. Mr. Walker, he said, leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his big hands folded together. If I call Chicago PD at 3:47 on a Saturday afternoon, what happens? They take a report. They ask questions. They run the number. Best case, a patrol unit reaches Elwood Township in 90 minutes. Worst case, Daniel gets wind of it, makes 3 phone calls, and by the time anyone arrives at that cabin, there's nothing there but an empty room and 2 guys with clean records swearing they never heard of you. So you decided to handle it yourself, I said. I decided to protect Olivia first, he said firmly, and get you out second, in that order. Because if Daniel panics and runs, or if he does something stupid to cover his tracks, Olivia is the one standing closest to the blast. I couldn't argue with that. The man had 16 years on the Chicago PD and 11 years reading rooms that could turn dangerous in a heartbeat. I wasn't going to second-guess him. Marcus had called Patricia Holloway at 3:48. Patricia was the Carter family's private attorney, 55 years old, silver-haired, the kind of woman who had argued in front of the Illinois Supreme Court 3 times and won twice. She picked up on the first ring. Patricia. Marcus said, I need 30 seconds, and I need you to not ask questions until I'm done. Go, she said. He laid it out. In under a minute, Richard Walker unlawfully restrained in a property near Elwood Township. Daniel Walker implicated via documented messages. Arthur Voss performing identity fraud at an active event. Olivia Carter in possession of the evidence. There was a pause on the line, not hesitation, just calculation. The restraint charge is a Class 4 felony under Illinois statute. Patricia said briskly. 72OILCS 5/10-3. Two individuals named in the messages means conspiracy exposure. If you can get the victim out safely and preserve the chain of evidence, we hold everything until the right moment. Her voice sharpened. Marcus, do not let that phone out of your custody. Do you hear me? That phone is your entire case. Already photographed every screen, he said. Phone is in my jacket. Good man. Get Richard Walker out. I'll be at the Langham by 6. Olivia told me she was in the ballroom when Marcus pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand between the salad course and the main. She excused herself to the powder room, unfolded it, and read 4 words in Marcus's blocky handwriting. We have an address. She told me she had to grip the edge of the sink with both hands to keep her knees from giving out entirely. I looked at myself in that mirror, she said later, and her eyes were bright with something halfway between fury and grief. And I thought about every dinner Daniel and I had at his father's house, about how Richard always stood up when I walked in the room, about how he called me Miss Olivia the first 3 times we met, even after I told him to drop it, about how he showed me a photograph of Margaret on their wedding day and said, "She would have loved you." Her voice broke clean in half. And I thought about that man sitting in a cabin 40 minutes from here because my fiancé decided he was an inconvenience. What did you do? I asked her. She straightened up, she told me, smoothed her dress, walked back to the table, smiled at Daniel across the centerpiece of white peonies, and told him the salmon was wonderful. He said, "You seem distracted, sweetheart." She laughed bitterly. I said, "I'm just overwhelmed. It's been a perfect day." And he believed me. He actually believed me. Meanwhile, Marcus was in the hotel parking structure with 2 men from his team. Boyd, a former Army Ranger, and a younger operative named Cole, who had driven route surveillance in 3 counties. Marcus spread a road map across the hood of his SUV. He used it alongside the cell tower data Cole had already pulled. GPS alone wasn't precise enough for rural county roads, with 2 registered properties sitting less than a quarter mile apart. He needed to see the lay of the land the way you see it on paper, not on a screen. Elwood Township, 2 registered rural properties off the Elwood-Simerton Road, he said, tracing the route with 1 finger. First property is a working farmhouse active lease family of 4. Second property is a hunting cabin vacant since January. That's our target. Boyd cracked his knuckles. How many inside? 1 confirmed at the door, Marcus said. Possibly 2. We treat it as 2 until we know different. He straightened and looked at both men. We are not law enforcement tonight. We are private citizens conducting a welfare check. Nobody touches anybody unless Mr. Walker is in immediate danger. Understood. Understood, both men said together. Marcus pulled on his jacket, checked his phone one last time, and said something I keep turning over in my mind even now. Richard Walker spent 30 years fixing other people's broken things, he said quietly. Tonight, we return the favor. They got in the SUV at 4:15 and drove south toward Joliet, into the last burnt orange hour of the afternoon. And in a cabin near Elwood Township, I sat on a cold concrete floor, talking to Margaret the way I always do when things get bad. And I waited. I heard the car before I saw anything. It was a low, steady engine, not the rattling pickup Tyler drove, not the van that had brought me here. This was something heavier, purposeful, the way a vehicle sounds when the person behind the wheel knows exactly where they're going. I pressed my ear to the cabin wall and felt the vibration travel through the wood. Then I heard Tyler's voice outside, sharp and suddenly uncertain. Hey, who are you? This is private property." The response was calm, almost gentle. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm head of security for the Carter family." A beat. "You have 2 options, son. Option 1, you step away from that door, you sit down on the ground, and you wait for the people who are going to come ask you some questions. Option 2, I show you the 14 text messages on Daniel Walker's phone that put your name on a kidnapping charge, and then you make a very bad decision, and this gets considerably worse for you. Another beat. Your choice. You've got about 4 seconds. I heard Tyler's boots scrape gravel. Then the thud of him sitting down. The door latch rattled. Then it swung open. The evening light came in first, that low, burnt amber Illinois light that hits different when you haven't seen the sky in hours. I had to raise my hand against it. My eyes were burning not from the light, but from something else entirely, something that started in my chest and climbed famoust. Marcus Webb filled the doorway. He was broader than I'd imagined from Olivia's description, a stocky man with a graying beard and a gaze that could stop a room. He looked at me for exactly 1 second, taking in the state of me, and then he stepped forward with his hand out. "Mr. Walker," he said, "Marcus Webb, let's get you out of here." I grabbed his hand, and he pulled me to my feet. My legs were stiff from hours on the concrete, and my knees buckled for just a second. Marcus caught my arm without making a production of it. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I've been walking since 1956, I told him. "I'm not stopping now." Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but close. He walked me out. Kevin Doyle was already seated on the ground next to Tyler, both of them with their hands visible. Boyd standing 15 feet away, with his arms folded and a look on his face that made it very clear he was not someone you wanted to test. Cole was on the phone already relaying the situation to Patricia Holloway. The evening air hit me like cold water. I stood in the gravel clearing in front of that cabin and breathed in deep pine exhaust, distant highway, the particular smell of Illinois countryside in late October. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I made it, Maggie, I thought. I made it. Marcus put his phone in my hand. "Someone wants to talk to you," he said. I brought it to my ear. "Mr. Walker." Olivia's voice came through, and it was raw, the way a wound is raw, not healed. Not clean, just open and real. "Oh, thank God. Are you all right?" "Tell me you're all right." "I'm standing in a gravel driveway in Will County," I said, watching 2 young men contemplate the consequences of very poor life choices. "I'd call that all right." She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and it went straight through me. "I need to ask you something," she said, steadying herself. "And I need you to know that whatever you say, I will respect it completely. Ask me, will you come back?" Her voice dropped. "Not for Daniel. Not for me even. But because there are 300 people in that ballroom who deserve to see what the truth looks like when it walks through a door. Because Patricia is already here and the evidence is in Marcus's pocket and we are ready. But Richard, we cannot do this without you. I won't do it without you." My heart was pounding. Not from fear, from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something that felt very close to purpose. "Olivia," I said, when my wife was in the hospital the last time she told me something. She said, "Richard, the hardest thing a person can do is walk back into a room they were told to leave." I didn't understand what she meant then. I swallowed hard against the tightness in my throat. "I think I understand now." "Is that a yes?" she whispered. "That's a yes," I said. "I'm coming back." She exhaled long, shaking, complete, and I could feel the relief moving through the line like a current. Marcus took the phone back and spoke briefly. Then he turned to me, and this time what crossed his face was unmistakably a smile. "Boyd drives," he said. "I ride with you. We've got about 40 minutes. You want to tell me what to expect when we walk in." "A room full of very surprised people," I said, "and one man who's going to run out of things to say very quickly." Marcus nodded once. He opened the rear door of the SUV. I got in. Boyd swung us around on the gravel road and pointed the hood back toward the highway, back toward Chicago, back toward a ballroom full of people who thought the father of the groom was a 62-year-old actor in a dark blue suit. The speedometer climbed. The city lights began to gather on the horizon. and I pressed my hand flat against the window glass and watched Illinois blur past, thinking about Margaret, thinking about Daniel, thinking about the look on my son's face when he saw me walk through that door. 40 minutes, I told myself. Just 40 minutes. The grand ballroom of the Langham Chicago seats 300 people comfortably, and every single one of them was there that night. I know because when I walked through those doors, I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me at once, the way you feel a current shift when you step into moving water. The string quartet in the corner stumbled on a note and recovered. A waiter stopped mid-pour. Someone at a table near the back actually stood up. Marcus walked 2 steps behind me, which I told him wasn't necessary. "It's not for you," he said quietly. "It's for the room." I was wearing the same dark suit I'd put on that morning, the one I'd worn to Margaret's funeral 13 years ago, the one I'd ironed the night before with more care than anything I'd ironed in years. It was not a Langham kind of suit. The lapels were a little wide, the fabric a little thin at the elbows. But it was mine, and I was wearing it, and I walked into that ballroom like I had every right in the world to be there. Because I did. The first person who recognized me was Frank Kowalski's cousin, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who'd worked at our shop briefly in the 90s, and happened to be a guest of one of Olivia's colleagues. He rose halfway out of his chair and said, Richard Walker," and his voice carried farther than he intended. That was all it took. Arthur Voss was standing near the dessert table, a glass of champagne in one hand and a small plate of petits fours in the other, engaged in conversation with a man I later learned was one of William Carter's business partners. I watched the exact moment Arthur registered my face across the room. The color drained out of him so fast, it was like watching a blind snap shut. His champagne glass tipped, and he caught it only by reflex, the pale liquid sloshing over his fingers. "Excuse me," he said to the man beside him, and his voice came out in a rasp. Excuse me." He started moving toward the far exit, and Marcus stepped smoothly to intercept him. Not aggressively, Marcus didn't need aggression. He simply appeared in Arthur's path, placed a hand briefly on the older man's shoulder, and said something low enough that I couldn't hear it from across the room. Arthur stopped moving. His shoulders dropped. Whatever Marcus said, it was enough. Then I saw Daniel. He was at the head table standing between 2 of his law partners, a glass of bourbon in his hand, and the particular loose-shouldered ease of a man who believed everything was going exactly according to plan. He was laughing at something one of them had said, laughing the way he used to laugh when he was a boy, with his whole face the laugh I'd spent 30 years loving. He turned and he saw me. I watched the laugh die. I watched the blood leave his face so completely that for one terrible second, he looked like a stranger wearing my son's features. The bourbon glass came down on the table too hard, and the man next to him startled. Daniel walked toward me. Fast. His jaw was tight and his eyes were doing something I had never seen them do before, something between fury and terror that churned together into an expression I had no name for. "Dad." His voice came out low, bitten off. How did you? "Your wife called me," I said, and I watched him flinch at that word. "Wife. Well, your almost wife. You need to leave," he said, and he reached out and grabbed my arm just above the elbow. His grip was hard. "Right now. You need to walk out that door and take your hand off me, Daniel." My voice was quiet. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. I spent 8 hours on a concrete floor in a cabin outside Joliet because 2 men you hired put me there. You don't get to put your hands on me again. His grip loosened. His hand dropped. His eyes swept the room, checking who was watching, calculating the way he'd calculated everything for the past 14 months. And then something shifted in his face. Not remorse. Not yet. Just the dawning recognition that the variables had changed. "Dad, listen to me," he said, dropping his voice further, stepping closer. "Whatever Olivia told you, Whatever she thinks she found, it's not what it looks like. I can explain all of it. Just come somewhere private with me and I'll— You hired an actor to stand at that altar in my place, I said. Each word came out measured and separate, like nails being set one at a time. You paid 2 men to lock me in a cabin 40 minutes outside Chicago. You have been having an affair with Olivia's sister for 14 months. I stopped. Let that sit in the air between us. What part of that exactly are you going to explain? Daniel's mouth opened, closed. His throat worked. Dad. His voice broke on that one syllable, and for just a flash, just a fraction of a second, I saw the boy again. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives. The boy who cried for 3 days straight when Margaret died. And my heart contracted so violently I had to breathe through it. But loving someone and letting them harm you are 2 different things. Margaret taught me that. I'm not here because I'm angry. I told him and I meant it down to my bones. I'm here because Olivia Carter deserves to hear the truth from someone who isn't afraid of it. I held his gaze steadily, even as my eyes burned with everything I was refusing to let spill. And so do these people. I turned away from him. My legs were steady, which surprised me. I walked toward the center of the room where Olivia was already standing, and when she saw me, she pressed both hands over her mouth and made a sound that tore something loose inside me. You came, she whispered, reaching for my hand and gripping it hard. Her fingers were cold and shaking. You actually came. I told you I would, I said. Behind us, Daniel stood at the head table, chest heaving, watching the room begin to turn. Patricia Holloway appeared near the AV station by the side wall, exchanging a quick nod with Marcus. The large LED screen above the stage, the one that had been cycling through wedding photos all evening, flickered once. Then it went dark, and Olivia Carter straightened her spine, turned to face the room, and lifted the wireless microphone from the table. The entire ballroom went still, the way things go still just before a storm breaks. The LED screen above the stage had been cycling wedding photos all evening. Daniel and Olivia at the Bean. Daniel and Olivia at a vineyard in Napa. Daniel and Olivia at some charity gala with their heads tilted together and their smiles bright and perfectly composed. 300 guests had spent the evening glancing up at those images the way you glance at a fireplace, comforting, warm, expected. When the screen went dark, every conversation in the room stopped. Olivia raised the microphone. Her hand was trembling. I could see it from where I stood 2 steps to her right. But her voice, when it came, was the steadiest thing in that room. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she said. It means more than I can say. And I want to make sure that before this evening ends, everyone in this room has the full picture of what they came here to celebrate. Daniel moved from the head table. Fast. Olivia, sit down, Daniel. She said it the way you say something you've been holding back for a very long time. Not loud, not theatrical, just absolute. He stopped walking. I am going to finish. She nodded once toward Patricia Holloway at the AV station, and the screen came alive. The first image was the contract. Clean scanned, every word legible from the back of the room. Agreement of service between Daniel A. Walker and Arthur G. Voss. Fee, $15,000. Role wedding representative. Date of performance. The Carter family's wedding date printed in black and white. A sound went through the room like wind through a field, 300 people drawing breath at once. That contract, Olivia said, was signed by my fiancé 3 weeks before our wedding. The man who has been sitting at table 4 this evening. The man who introduced himself to several of you as Richard Walker, retired mechanic from the South Side. His name is Arthur Voss. He is a theater actor from Wicker Park. He was paid $15,000 to impersonate Daniel's father at this ceremony because Daniel decided that his real father was not the kind of man he wanted in this room. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of full, pressurized silence that exists right before something irreversible happens. Arthur Voss stood up from table 4. He was 62, gray-haired, and in that moment, he looked every one of his years. His face was the color of old concrete. He pulled off the boutonniere on his lapel, the white rose that matched Daniel's, and set it on the table in front of him. "My name is Arthur Gerald Voss," he said, and his voice shook badly, but he kept going. "I am not Richard Walker. I have never been a mechanic. I memorized facts about a man I never met, and I stood at that altar this afternoon, and I—" His voice broke entirely. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. "I am sorry. I am deeply, profoundly sorry. Especially to you, Mr. Walker." He looked directly at me when he said it. I gave him a single nod. It was all I could manage. The screen changed. The next images were photographs Daniel and Sophia at a restaurant. Daniel and Sophia at a hotel, timestamps visible in the corner of each frame. 14 months of a life Daniel had been living in parallel, documented in the clinical, indifferent way that smartphones document everything. A sharp cry came from somewhere in the middle of the room. Sophia Carter pushed back from her chair. She was 26, slight, with Olivia's same dark hair, and none of Olivia's composure. Her face was a wreck, mascara tracking down both cheeks, chest heaving. She knocked a water glass with her elbow and didn't notice it fall. "Olivia," her voice came out wrecked, gutted. "Olivia, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't. I know there's nothing I can say. Sophia." Olivia's voice was like a closed door, not cruel, just closed. Sophia pressed both hands over her face and started crying in earnest, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. The woman next to her reached out and touched her arm. The screen changed again. The Tyler and Kevin messages. Package secured. En route. ETA 90 minutes. Confirm no medical attention required. The package referred to in those messages, Olivia said, and her voice finally cracked on the words, just barely, is Richard Walker, Daniel's father. A 68-year-old retired mechanic who ironed his suit last night and had his shoes polished this morning so he could watch his son get married. She stopped, steadied. Instead, he spent 8 hours in a locked cabin 40 minutes south of Chicago. I heard someone at a table near the front say, "Oh my God!" A woman's voice, low and horrified. I heard Judge Harold Bennett push back his chair at table 1. He straightened his jacket and walked toward the exit without looking at Daniel. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. When a federal judge leaves your wedding reception, the statement makes itself. Daniel was still standing near the head table. He'd stopped trying to move, stopped trying to speak. His face had gone through 6 different expressions in the past 4 minutes, and what was left now was something raw and broken that I recognized because it was the same face he'd made at 13 when he told me he'd failed his history final and didn't know how to say it. Even now, even after everything. That recognition landed in my chest like a stone dropping into deep water. "Daniel." Olivia walked to him. She stood directly in front of him, and she reached down and took his left hand in both of hers gently, the way you handle something that has already broken. She worked the platinum wedding band off his finger and placed it in his palm. Then she reached up and removed her own engagement ring and set it beside it. "I loved who I thought you were," she said softly. "I'm sorry that person wasn't real." Daniel's face crumpled. His whole body seemed to contract, shoulders rounding, chest caving, like something structural had given way inside him. A sound came out of him, words, just sound, and it was the most devastated thing I'd ever heard come out of my son's mouth. My heart broke for him, and it hardened against him, both at once. That's the thing about loving someone through their worst moment. There's no clean feeling available. Olivia turned away from Daniel and walked toward me. She was crying now, finally, completely, tears running freely, shoulders shaking, but her chin was up and her feet were steady. "Mr. Walker," she said, "will you walk me out?" I offered her my arm. She took it, and we walked out of the grand ballroom of the Langham Chicago together, the retired mechanic in the old funeral suite, and the woman who had just burned her own wedding to the ground, rather than build a life on someone else's lies. Behind us, I heard Daniel say my name, just once, quietly. "Dad," I kept walking. I drove home alone that night. Marcus offered to have Boyd take me back to the south side, but I told him no. I needed the drive. I needed the 40 minutes of Chicago at night, moving past my windows, the orange glow of the expressway lights, the dark shape of the skyline behind me, the familiar rattle of my truck on the 94 South ramp. I needed to sit with everything that had happened before I brought it inside my house. I got home at 11:40. I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes before I went in. Frank was on my porch at 7 the next morning, with a paper bag of bagels and 2 coffees from the diner on Ashland. He didn't knock. He just sat in the second chair, the one that used to be Margaret's, and waited. When I opened the door and found him there, something in my chest that had been wound tight for weeks finally slowly began to loosen. "I heard," he said, handing me a coffee. "Already. Gerald called me at midnight." He pulled a bagel out of the bag. "He said you walked into the Langham in your funeral suit and looked like you owned the building." "I didn't own anything," I said. "I was terrified the whole time. Best kept secret of the night then." He took a bite, chewed, and looked at me sideways. "You okay, Richard?" My throat tightened. I pressed my thumb against the lid of the coffee cup, hard enough to feel the edge. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Ask me in a week." Frank nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Because with Frank, it was. The legal consequences came faster than I expected. Patricia Holloway filed a formal complaint with the ARDC, the Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission of Illinois, within 72 hours of the wedding night. The case moved quickly because the evidence was airtight, documented messages, signed contracts, bank transfer records. 3 weeks after the reception, I got a call from an investigator named Sergeant Dennis Howard, Will County Sheriff's Department, asking me to come in and give a formal statement about my detention. I went on a Tuesday morning. I sat across from Sergeant Howard for 2 hours and told him everything from the fake EMS call to the moment Marcus opened the cabin door. He was a methodical man, unhurried, the kind of interviewer who writes everything down by hand. When I finished, he set his pen down and said, "Mr. Walker, I want you to know Tyler Marsh and Kevin Doyle were taken into custody 4 days ago. They've both been charged under 720 ILCS 5/10-3, unlawful restraint, Class 4 felony." My hands were steady on the table, but underneath the surface, I was shaking. "And Daniel?" I asked. Sergeant Howard looked at me carefully. "That's a separate proceeding, Mr. Walker, but I can tell you the ARDC investigation is active." I thanked him and drove home. Olivia came to see me on a Saturday in early November, not quite 3 weeks after the wedding. She knocked at the front door at noon, still wearing the careful, composed expression she'd had in that ballroom. But her eyes were red-rimmed around the edges in a way that no amount of composure could hide. "I won't stay long," she said quickly when I opened the door. I needed to say it in person." "Come in," I said. "I'll make coffee." She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten 30 years of breakfasts alone, and folded her hands around the mug I gave her. "I want to apologize to you," she said. "Olivia, please." She looked up at me, and her eyes were bright with tears she was clearly determined not to shed. "I brought Daniel into your life. I was the one who was going to marry him. And everything that happened to you, the cabin, those men, that whole—" She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. "That happened because of my wedding. It happened," I said carefully, "because of Daniel's choices. Not yours, not mine. his. A tear broke loose anyway and tracked down her cheek. She wiped it away fast, almost angry at it. "He's going to lose his license," she said quietly. "Patricia thinks the ARDC will rule within 6 months. And the civil liability," she shook her head. "He built everything on that career. Everything." "I know," I said. "Does it make you feel better?" she asked. "Knowing that—" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "No," I said. "It just makes me sad." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine briefly. And then she stood and she left. And I stood at my kitchen window and watched her walk to her car and felt something immense and unnameable settle over my shoulders. Daniel came on a Wednesday evening in mid-November. I heard the car first. I know the sound of his engine the way I know my own heartbeat, 20 years of listening for it in the driveway. I was in the kitchen when he knocked. 4 knocks, not 3, not the way he used to knock as a boy. I opened the door. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His hair was uncombed, his jaw unshaved, the collar of his jacket pulled up against the November cold. He was holding something in both hands, a beige envelope, new and crisp, not the one I recognized, not the original. This one had been written fresh, the same amount in the same neat hand, but the paper was unwrinkled. He had gone back to the bank. He had written it again. That told me more than anything he was about to say. "Dad?" His voice came out hollow. His eyes were red and raw, and he looked at me with an expression so gutted, it was almost hard to bear. I don't know where to start." "Then start anywhere," I said. "Just start." He swallowed hard. His hands tightened on the envelope, and then released it like he couldn't decide what to do with it. "I was ashamed of you," he said, and his voice broke on the last word, cracked right down the middle. "Not because you did anything wrong. Because I was ashamed of myself, of where I came from, of the shop and the apartment and—" He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a second, fighting for control. "I thought if I could just get through the wedding without anyone connecting me to all of it, to everything that made me feel small, then I could be someone different." My chest was on fire. My eyes were burning so badly, I had to blink several times to keep them clear. "Daniel," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, "you were never small to me. Not one single day of your life." He made a sound, a terrible broken sound, and his whole face collapsed. Tears ran freely down his face, and he didn't try to stop them, didn't try to compose himself. He held the envelope out toward me with both hands shaking. "I can't keep this," he said. "I never should have—" "Put it on the table," I said. I stepped back from the door. "Come inside, Daniel, it's cold." He came in. He set the envelope on my kitchen table. He sat in the chair across from mine, and he pressed both hands flat on the table, like he needed something solid to hold on to, and he cried. Really cried the way I hadn't seen him cry since he was 13 years old. I sat across from him and let him. After a long time, I said, "I'm not ready to forgive you yet. You need to know that." He nodded, still not trusting his voice. "But I'm not done being your father either," I said. "You need to know that too." He looked up at me then, and in his eyes, underneath all the devastation, underneath the wreckage of everything he'd done, I saw something that looked very much like the beginning of relief. The envelope sat on the table between us, untouched. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 11 days. I walked past it every morning. Made coffee, ate breakfast, read the paper, and it just sat there, slightly crumpled at one corner, where Daniel's hands had worked it over too many times. $25,000. Enough to fix the furnace, replace the truck's transmission, put a new roof on a house that had needed one for 4 years. I never opened it. Frank came by on a Saturday in early December, a gray, bitter Chicago morning, with the kind of cold that has opinions about you. 2 coffees, a bag of donuts, no explanation for either. Classic Frank. "You look better," he said, dropping into Margaret's chair on the porch. "I slept," I said. "First full night in 2 months." "Good." He handed me a coffee. You talked to Daniel? Not yet. He texted twice. I read them both. I'm not ready to answer. Frank nodded. He never pushed. 35 years of friendship, and he had never once pushed me toward a feeling I wasn't ready to have. What did they say? He asked. I pulled out my phone and read them aloud because somehow that was easier than paraphrasing. First one, I know you're not ready. I just want you to know I'm seeing a therapist. I'm going to figure out how I became someone capable of doing what I did. I set the phone on the railing. Second one, I think about Mom a lot. I think she would have been disappointed in me. That's the worst part. A gust of wind rattled the bare branches of the oak tree, the one Margaret planted the year Daniel was born. He's not wrong, Frank said quietly. About Margaret. She would have been furious, I said, my voice rough. And then she would have forgiven him in 48 hours, which would have made me even more furious. Frank laughed low and warm, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not healing exactly. More like the first movement of something that had been locked still for a long time. We were on our second coffees when my phone rang. Chicago area code number I didn't recognize. Something made me pick up anyway. Mr. Walker, it's Olivia. I sat up straighter. Olivia, are you all right? I'm good, she said, and the steadiness in her voice told me she meant it. New number, new apartment, Lincoln Square, 3rd floor, no doorman. Honestly, kind of a relief. Good neighborhood, I said. Good bakeries. She laughed, nothing performed about it. Already found 3. I'm working my way through. A pause. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Not just functioning okay. Actually okay. I'm getting there, I said. Day by day. That's all any of us can do. Her voice softened. He's going to lose his license. Patricia says the ARDC ruling comes in the spring. I'm not going to pretend I don't feel something about that, but I don't feel as much as I thought I would. What do you feel? I asked. She took a real moment before answering. Sad for who he could have been, and grateful I found out before it was too late to build something real instead. A pause. I learned that from someone. A 68-year-old man in a funeral suit who walked into a room he'd been paid to stay out of and did it without hating anybody. My eyes went hot. I pressed the back of my hand against them and breathed carefully. You're going to be all right, Olivia, I said. I mean that. I know you do, she said. Merry Christmas, Mr. Walker. Merry Christmas. Take care of yourself. After she hung up, I went inside, stopped at the kitchen table, and picked up the envelope. I carried it to the bedroom and opened the drawer on Margaret's side of the nightstand. Her reading glasses still there. Her bookmark still in the novel she never finished. I placed the envelope beside her photograph. Navy Pier, 1987. She's laughing. I'm looking at her like she hung the moon. Because she did. I didn't cash it, Maggie, I said out loud. I want you to know that. The drawer closed with a quiet final click. Outside, Frank was eyeing a second donut. The oak tree stood bare against a gray December sky. Somewhere in Lincoln Square, Olivia was finding her 4th bakery. Somewhere across this city, my son was learning how to say the things he should have said years ago. I stood in my kitchen doorway and thought about what Margaret always said when things got heavy. You don't have to fix everything tonight, Richard. Just make sure the people who matter know you're still here. $25,000 sealed in a drawer. A father still here. That was always going to be worth more. You know, someone asked me once whether I ever prayed during those 8 hours in that cabin. And the honest answer is yes. I'm not a man who talks about God often, but I talked to him that night, quietly in the dark on a concrete floor. And I asked him not for rescue, but for clarity. For the wisdom to know what to do when the door finally opened. He answered, just not the way I expected. Here's what I've learned from all of this, and I'm telling you as a man who got it wrong plenty of times before he got it right. Don't be like me. Don't wait until someone hands you a check to realize how far apart you've drifted from the people you love. Don't let the years stack up between you and your children, your parents, your family. without saying the hard things out loud while there's still time. Pride is a quiet thief. It takes everything before you notice it's even in the room. My personal belief: a person's worth has nothing to do with the suit they wear or the address on their mailbox. It never did. What matters, the only thing that ever really matters, is whether you showed up, whether you stayed. These are the grandpa stories nobody puts in the highlight reel. These are the family story moments that happen in kitchens and driveways and concrete floor cabins, not in ballrooms. And these grandpa stories, the painful, honest, unglamorous ones, are the only ones worth telling. If this family story moved something in you, leave a comment and tell me which moment hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe these grandpa stories deserve to keep being told, you know what to do. Thank you from the bottom of this old mechanic's heart for staying until the very end. And one final note: the stories coming up next contain some fictional elements, crafted purely for the purpose of reflection and life lessons. If that's not what you're looking for tonight, no hard feelings at all. Choose what feeds your soul. We'll be here when you're ready.